Here we are on the north coast, where sporting legends are made. He needs this putt to advance to the next stage, but can he do it? The crowd are holding their breath. Can he cope with the pressure?
Dad, would you take the shot?
Well,
Hello and welcome to Guess Who's Talking with me, Linda Bryans. Well, my first guest tonight is a sports broadcaster, a man whose name is synonymous with rugby and boxing. He's covered 8 Olympic Games, 10 Rugby World Cups and 9 Commonwealth Games. And he's commentated on more than 350 international rugby matches. He is Jim Neely, MBE. Jim, it's lovely to have you on the programme.
it's lovely to be here.
That's quite a record, isn't it? Quite a career.
Well, yes. When I started off my working life as a teacher of chemistry in the boys' model in North Belfast, I never for one moment thought that just about 50 years later I would have been doing what I did now. Had I still been teaching, I would have been long since retired and taken the teaching pension and be quite happy tootling backward and forward to a little place up in Donegal.
How did it start for you then? How did you make that transition?
Well, I suppose if I ever get around to writing the book, the opening line would have to be, it was all George Hamilton's fault. And George, who went from BBC Northern Ireland to RTE and across the radio too and back to RTE, was one of my best pals, and he encouraged me to try a little bit of broadcasting. And we went over to Scotland for an Ireland-Scotland B International at Murrayfield. George was commentating for Radio Ulster, and I was injured playing rugby at the time and coming to the end of a very average career. And I went along with him in the car, and he brought a little tape recorder and a microphone with him, and I sat up at the back of the stand with the match day programme, and I knew most of the players because I played with or against them, and I did what I thought was a commentary. And we laughed about it and played it in the car on the way home, nearly crashed about 10 times, and he took the tape into the formidable Joy Williams, who was in charge of BBC Sport in Northern Ireland at the time, and she liked what she heard and phoned me and asked me would I go along and do a rugby match for Saturday Sports Sound in those days. So I did, and that was December 1977, which is 47 years ago.
So it all started with a radio report then?
Oh yes, the wireless is to me, I just love the wireless. The wireless to me will always be the senior service, and I did that for a few weeks, went back to playing, got injured again, did a little bit more, and at that stage I think I'd got bitten, the bug had got me, and Joy set up a commentary that never made the air just to see if I could do it. And apparently I could, and in 1978 on St Patrick's Day I did my first live broadcast, which was on the radio, was the Ulster Schools Cup, and George went to Argentina to cover the Football World Cup for RTE, and he was so good, of course, that they offered him a job, so he left and went to Dublin, and I was offered a 1-year contract at the time to present sport on Scene Around 6 with Barry Cowan presenting and do a bit of rugby, and after a year they decided to keep me on, and the rest, I guess, is what they say is history.
And you've never looked back. How many decades later, can we say?
Well, I'm now into my 6th decade of broadcasting, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the noughties, the teenies, and now the 20s. And it's been fun all the way.
You mentioned the Schools Cup, which was your first broadcast there. And I'm just thinking, you must have seen a lot of careers start at Schools Cup rugby age and then go on to retirement, on to, internationals, Lions, etc.
It's been wonderful. The very first Schools Cup I did, Bangor Grammar beat Annandale, and Bangor Grammar were captained by a chap called Kenny Hooks, who went on then to play for Ireland only within a couple of years of leaving school, and then came back as the coach to the Armagh Royal side. So one of the very few people, if not the only person to have actually captained a Schools Cup winning side and coached a Schools Cup winning side, but people like himself and Jeremy Davidson, Jonathan Bell, Niall Malone, Mark McCall, who's coaching Saracens now. So many chaps have come through Schools Cup and have gone on to play international rugby, but they will all say And I did a radio programme years ago and interviewed people who'd played in Schools Cup finals and captained Schools Cup winning sides and then went on to play for Ireland. And they all said that there was nothing, even playing for Ireland at Lansdowne Road, there was nothing like running out at Ravenhill on the 17th of March, St Patrick's Day, for a Schools Cup final. Every single one said that was the most treasured memory that they had in their rugby careers.
And do you know what I've noticed over the years, because we always watch the Schools Cup in my house, it used to be where you would say, oh, there's so-and-so who's the son of maybe somebody you played rugby with.
Oh, stop.
And these days,
Stop. Well, I have a good friend was at school with me, a chap called Alan Sweeney, and in recent years, 2 of his grandsons have played for our BAI, and Alan and I played together at school in Fernstonians, and all of a sudden, not just his son who came through, but he's got 2 grandsons. So it gives you, and you wonder, is this any relation to so and so? And I get them to fill in forms, and some of them put their names in as Elvis Presley or John Lennon or something, just silly little schoolboys. But I wonder, is he related? And then you find out that they are related, and that gives you something more to talk about.
What about the prep that you do for matches? Because you reel off these stats, facts, figures, names and so on, and who's played for what or whatever. How much prep do you do these days for a match?
I do the same amount of prep as I always did, right from the very first one, and I watched George Hamilton to see what prep he did for rugby games in particular, and he had learned from the master himself, Bill McLaren, whose statistics, like what Bill called his big sheets, are like something should be hung up in the Louvre. Fantastic. So 90% of it, particularly when you're doing a radio commentary, you never get to use, because it's not all about stats, it's about describing what's going on, and it's identifying players and geography and where on the pitch the game is taking place. It's on the left-hand side, the Irish left, just outside the 10-metre line, Ireland playing from left to right towards the Lansdowne Road end, etc., etc. So that's very much a part of radio commentary, which I love beyond anything else. But I always do the same thing. I have lots of little coloured pencils, and I put the names in red, I put the number of caps in green, I do this in black and something else in blue, and only I can read them. Like they become, as the years go on, they become a bit of a scroll. But if I didn't do the same level of prep for every game, I wouldn't be happy going into it. And there's, I like to be sitting down, particularly at Lansdowne Road, and the producer says, okay, stand by, coming to you next. And the presenter of the programme, and this usually Gavin Andrews in recent years, said, well, let's go over and join our commentary team, whoever it is, and first of all, Jim Neely. And you take a deep breath, and you still get that excitement.
Do you?
Oh, absolutely, because when the referee blows the whistle, you've got 15 guys, the laws are the same, nothing much has changed, maybe they changed their jerseys, but when the referee blows the whistle and somebody kicks it off, you have no idea what's going to happen. Every game is different. There are certain patterns and people play the same way, and you look at that and say, well, they did that last week and that worked. But from a broadcasting point of view, it's such a thrill to be there and describe what's unfolding live in front of your very eyes. And I remember years and years ago going over to London, one of my area games at Twickenham, and the day before I was in Broadcasting House in London, and there was a chap called Angus Mackay who'd been the head of Radio Sport, and he came over and had a chat with me, and I said I was really enjoying it. I was in my infancy, it was my second year or something commentating, and he said, never forget, laddie, he said, it's an absolute privilege to be allowed anywhere near a microphone, and I've never forgotten that.
Yeah, and you're the master of it, you really are. But there's such camaraderie in rugby, in all sport, but you strike me as somebody who you're friends with all of these guys, you've commentated on their careers, and you're still mates with them now.
Well, when I started off, I was commentating on people that I knew and had played with and against, and the first international I did was Ireland-France in January 1979, and it was the first time that my great friend Fergus Slattery had captained the Irish team. And when I started doing this, he phoned me out of the blue and said, hello, it's Fergus Slattery here. I just want to say it's nice to have somebody who actually played a wee bit, and we get on very well. And when he stopped playing, I can remember about 5 years later, I asked him would he like to come and be my permanent second voice, because I didn't really have anybody who was doing it regularly, and he said that he would love to do it, but could he leave it for a year? And I said, well, why do you want to leave it for a year, Fergus? I appreciate your sentiments. He said, well, he said, to be honest, there are 2 or 3 of my best friends still playing for Ireland. He said, and I would hate to have to tell the truth about them. I understood exactly what he meant.
I heard you commentating recently on the Ireland-Fiji match in the autumn series, and some of the pronunciations you're faced with. Does that not throw you?
Oh yeah, you know, Doris and Prendergast and
I was thinking of the
Henshaw
Fijians.
and Bundyaki. Well, yes, of course. It's not easy, and I mean, you know, you get teams like that: the Tongans, the Samoans, the Fijians, Romanians in particular, Japanese. I can remember years ago it was a World Cup in France, 2007. And I got a train, went down to Toulouse, and I was covering Fiji against Japan for what was Radio 5 Live. And they were just coming to me every 10 minutes just for updates because there was another match going on. And with about 20 minutes into the first half, the producer in London said, we've lost the line from the main commentary game and we've nothing else to go to. Can you commentate properly? I was just on my own and take us up to half time. And I said, well, I suppose so, but I had done no prep because I wasn't meant to be commentating on it. So I had to do Fiji against Japan, and they were scoring tries every 30 seconds. Fijians were running it from all over the place. Japan were scuttling around, and they were scoring. And I was exhausted. And at the start of the second half, they said, we still haven't got the line from wherever it was. Can you keep going? So about 18 minutes into the second half, I'm nearly on my knees doing this game, and then they said, it's okay, we've got such and such a game, we'd like to stay with you because it's very exciting, but they went off to somewhere else, and I collapsed in a heap of exhaust. That was the toughest game I think I ever did because I had no prep done.
Yeah.
And didn't need to do any prep because I didn't think I was going to be commentating.
Well, I'm sure you did it masterfully, as you always do.
Well, I did my best.
We haven't talked about the boxing yet, because that's your other great sport that you've commentated on for years. Where did that, because were you a boxer as well?
I boxed a wee bit at school and then they stopped it, and my dad was very keen and he boxed at Trinity, and he used to get me up when I was very little, even at primary school, to listen to world title fights coming in from across the pond. And there was a chap, I always remember, there was a chap called Raymond Glendinning did the commentary before Eamon Andrews. There was Raymond Glendinning with inter-round summaries by a journalist called Barrington Dolby, and I remember that saying, we were over and join Raymond Glendinning, who's with W. Barrington Dolby. I remember listening to Rocky Marciano knocking lumps out of a British heavyweight who wasn't very good called Don Cockle, and it was over in California, and Dad got me up at silly o'clock in the morning to listen to this. How I got into boxing commentary wise was that after the Moscow Olympics in 1980, Barney Eastwood had signed Barry McGuigan and Hugh Russell and 2 or 3 others, and came to the BBC in Belfast and said he was going to try to reintroduce boxing at a very modest level, and would the BBC be interested in picking up the reins, so to speak. And he didn't need the money, but he wanted somebody to provide the coverage, so we did that, and I put my hand up and said I'm quite happy to try and do the commentary. So they let me do the commentary, and my first commentary was for radio. And my second voice was a lovely man called Harry Mullen, who was the editor of the boxing newspaper. And it was at Dalymount Park in Dublin in May of 1981, which is, 43 years ago. And it was Charlie Nash lost his European title to an Italian called Joey Gibalesco, and Barry McGuigan made his debut. And thereafter I did a lot of Barry McGuigan's early fights until he started to get to European level, and then London came in and started to pay the big money, and of course little Harry Carpenter came in and took over, and you couldn't object to that, because Harry not only was a wonderful commentator, he was one of the nicest guys I think I've ever met.
Yes, I was going to ask you about Harry Carpenter. You must have known him pretty well, yeah?
I did. We got on particularly well. His producer told me the great story about the Moscow Olympics in 1980, and there was no computers in those days, so you had to rely on going around and talking to people. So they went around all the training sessions at all the gyms and had a list of things and talked to coaches and scribbled down things. And Harry had a little green box full of cards in each weight division. And on the first day he took out the middleweights, and he had the red corner here and the blue corner there, and everything nicely written out. And one of the other commentators came past him and saw all this stuff and said to him, "Gosh, Harry, where did you get all this?" And Harry looked up at him and beamed at him beatifically and said, "Did they not give you yours?"
Oh, fantastic. Well, Jim, in 2020, I think it was, you were awarded your MBE, and that must have been a great honour for you. You followed in your father's footsteps there.
Well, yes, 30 years earlier, my dad had been the headmaster in the school in Belfast, but he got involved with the Equal Opportunities Commission and finished up as vice chairman of that. And he did that for quite a few years, and hence his MBA. And he and my mum went over to the palace, and the Queen presented him with his, and I went over, God, 30 years later, and got it from the future king, Prince William. So I was quite chuffed, as much for my commentating as the stuff that I do for charity. I've been very involved in fundraising for leukemia, lymphoma research in Northern Ireland, and all the sort of stuff I do, talks and speeches and things like that. I asked for a contribution to my charity. So I was very pleased. I'm not sure how many father and son combinations have both got MBEs, but I was pretty chuffed with 3 very jolly days in London. It took me about a month to get over it, mind you, but it was good fun.
Why that charity in particular? Have you connections with that?
Well, one of my best friends and his wife Shirley, Sam and Shirley Sinclair, and Shirley has been a huge fundraiser for, and I decided I would come on board 20 odd years ago. So everything I do, I try to make sure the cheque is sent with a wee covering note to Shirley, simply because of my friendship with them.
Oh, great. Well deserved. Well, tell me this. I know that you've hinted that you might be hanging up the headphones quite soon. Is there any truth in that rumour? Are you retiring?
To be honest, if last year I had agreed to do another couple of years from August of 2023 to take in the Rugby World Cup, which was just over a year ago, and if Ireland had got to the final and had won the World Cup, I would have found something suitable to say and put the microphone down and never picked it up again, because that's maybe one of the things that I really have regretted not being able to do. You want to be there when the big events are happening. You want to be there when an Irish boxer is winning Olympic gold. You want to be there when a British boxer like Lennox Lewis beat Mike Tyson to win the heavyweight championship of the world. You want to be there at Twickenham when Ireland beat England to win the Grand Slam, and you want to be there at Lansdowne Road in January 1999 to watch Ulster win the European Cup, which was one of the great days. Awful game of rugby, but a great day. So you want to be there on the big occasions, and I really thought that last year was going to be the year that Ireland would win the World Cup, and they just couldn't do it, and they've never got to the semi-final. So I don't think I'll be at another World Cup. So I may not get to see, I probably won't get to see, work-wise, Ireland winning a World Cup.
But you have been there for many of those
highlights,
haven't you?
Oh yes.
You know, I mean, the way you reel off the names, the stats and everything, what an incredible memory.
Well, it all seems to be working so far, and let's hope it continues. I can remember people owing me a pint now and again, but So in terms of hanging up the microphone, the plan might be to stop next August, but we'll see. I could be persuaded, but there's no point. We don't want to go on too long, you know.
Well, I wouldn't say no to that. I've got to say, so if you do go to a rugby match just as a guest, as an ordinary spectator, as I do, will you not find it difficult to not be commentating and telling around you people around you what's happening on the pitch?
It's not too bad when you go along to watch a club game. Like I sometimes might go up and watch Belfast Harlequins or watch Instonians, my own club playing, and it's quite good fun because half the time you're meeting guys you were at school with and you're talking old nonsense to them. So, but in terms of going to the bigger games, I found it very difficult. I went many years ago. One of my good friends who was president of Ulster the last year they won something, a chap called Ian Graham, was head of PA in Grosvenor, and he got tickets for a European Cup quarter-final, and it was Munster against either Leinster or Leicester or Northampton at Lansdowne Road, the old Lansdowne Road, and we got down and we had 2 seats near the committee box and about 10 rows from the front, and it was awful.
Why?
It was awful. For a start, the seats were too small. I found it difficult to get my substantial derriere into them. You were too flat. I didn't have the referee in my ear. I didn't have a monitor to look at. I didn't have any action replays. I didn't have people talking to me. And there were people with pints of beer passing in front of us and moving about. It was awful. I thought I'm never going to do this. So whether or not I'd actually go to a match at that level, go to an international game and sit as a spectator after 40 some years as a commentator, the best seat in the house. My very first game, I have to tell you this, my very first game at international level was January 79 when Ireland played France in Dublin, and I knew quite a few of the Irish guys. I'd played with Colin Patterson and Alistair McKibben and so on, and Dick Spring was playing full back, and my
Dick Spring, who's the
went on to be Antonis.
Yeah.
Absolutely got three caps, I think, at full back, and mad as a brush, and best of crack. And Peter West was my co-commentator, and I'd grown up watching and listening to Peter West, who could do everything. He did the original Come Dancing for 12 years, and he said, I don't know why people make fun of me, but because it paid for my house. And he presented cricket, and he presented Wimbledon, and he was a wonderful, ubiquitous broadcaster. No autocue could pick it up like that. Was just a master of his craft. And the morning of the match, he phoned me and said, look, I missed breakfast. I've ordered some coffee and a scone or something. Can you come down to the room and go through the Irish guys? And he did it just to make me feel at home. He was wonderful. And at the end of the game, we did the whole thing, and I finished the game off. And we had bits to scribble out. I did Belfast and Cardiff and Glasgow. Or he did London and World Service. And then we were the only light, our little comedy box at Lansdowne Road, the only light in the place. And he took out his old pipe, and there he was in his tweed suit and his MCC tie and his Tattersall shirt, and he's puffing away, and he said, you know, Jimbo, he said, it's not a bad old life. He said, here we are in the best seat in the house talking about the game that we love. He said, we'll go back to the Shelbourne Hotel, have a couple of gin and tonics, nice bit of roast beef, glass of red wine, he said, and somebody's paying us to be here. Never forgot that.
Not a bad life. Jim,
not a bad
thank
life
you.
at all.
It's lovely to talk to you. Would you stay with me, please? Because very shortly we're going to be joined by another sporting icon, a rugby player turned baker. Back after the break.
Heading to the North Coast? The Jet Centre in Coleraine offers entertainment for everyone. There's an 8-screen movie house cinema with all the best movies, 10-pin bowling, a massive arcade, soft play for the wee ones. Outdoors, there's a mini fun park and gem mining, plus an 18-hole floodlit mini golf course. Rain or shine, there's something for everyone here at the Jet Centre. Find out more at thejetcentre.co.uk.
Welcome back to Guess Who's Talking. Now, we've been hearing some of the highlights of the career of rugby and boxing commentator Jim Neely, but joining us now is a sportsman who had to leave the rugby field due to injury. But these days, he has an even bigger fan base and he's found a career as a baker. He is Jonny Murphy, otherwise known on social media as the Hungry Hooker. Jonny, welcome to the programme.
Thank you for having me.
Over 250,000 followers now, something like that?
It's a bit mad now. I never really envisioned even doing this type of thing. It's sort of out of my wheelhouse, so it sort of just happened organically, and I'm sort of just running with it and see what happens.
It's a great name. Obviously, the hooker's the position you played.
Yeah. No, there's a few people have been like, oh, what's that mean? Especially like people that follow from America, like hooker wouldn't just be, rugby wouldn't be the first thing that pops into their heads. So I've had to explain that a few times. But yeah, a bit of a play on words back to the rugby days.
And a bit different being an influencer now. You're not happy with that term,
no,
though, are you?
It's funny, like one of my good mates, Conor Carey, you would have known, played underage rugby with me, and at Connacht, he was like, "Oh, you're an influencer now, Murph," and I was like, I couldn't be the furthest thing from it. Which might be a blessing as well. It's sort of like, it's a bit more relatable rather than sort of the whole song and dance some might show.
You're very modest. For those of us who maybe haven't seen your postings, here's the kind of thing that you put out every day.
2 years ago, up until recently, I didn't realise how much of a hole I was in. Suddenly retiring from a sport I'd played for over 25 years wasn't what I expected, and I think this can relate to all walks of life. I've openly spoken about my mental health, and the fact that so many have benefited from it, I want to keep helping. I know now that you just don't fix it or it goes away. You learn to live with it and how to control it. You don't go to the gym once and come out fit as a fiddle. It takes consistency and work, and our mental health is no different.
Mental health you talked about there. You were affected after you had to leave Connacht, professional rugby. What happened that you had to leave?
Yeah, I was having issues with a concussion, and then saw a specialist over in England, and he advised me to stop playing. So it was all sort of very like quick and sort of like ripping the band-aid off. So it was a big transition and change, and like I've been quite open recently about like my mental health and stuff, and I've struggled my whole life, and it was probably only recently, other than like family, and we had like a sort of bonding thing at Connacht. Andy Friend linked us all up in pairs, and it was sort of like your heroes, hardships, and highlights. And I was up first with Paul Boyle, and I sort of was like, you know what, I'm just going to come out with it, and a lot of people like benefited from it. And since then, you know, I feel if it can be normalised. And especially with the platform, like I never thought I'd have it. I wanted to try and do some sort of good with it as well, and sort of, you know, continue that. But whenever I finished, it sort of threw me a little bit and a bit of a wobble, and just trying to find my feet in probably like the real world was. It's funny because I've spoke to other lads, and you feel a bit guilty. You know, why do I feel like this? We're so privileged to play the game. But I think it's very relatable to all walks of life. You know, you could have a career in something and then just all of a sudden you have to stop. So it's just trying to normalise it. Absolutely.
Did you find it kind of cathartic, healing in a way, you know, to actually talk about it and bring it in the open?
Yeah. And especially with the bacon, you know, it's near enough like therapy in a way, like unknowingly, and especially doing it with my granny as well. Like she's been so helpful, and like unfortunately my uncle passed away around the same time as me retiring, so it was sort of like therapy for her as well, you know, and like we'd be very close anyway, and just that sort of like not common ground, but that sort of nostalgic side to it. And I think a lot of people relate to that, especially from home here. You know,
you do have a great relationship with your grandparents, and they feature heavily on your social media page. But I want to talk about, first of all, how did you get into baking, from rugby to baking? Where did that come from?
When I was younger, I always would have helped my granny over like school holidays and stuff. If I wasn't with my grand in the garage, I was helping her, and sort of just continued it throughout, you know, for mates' birthdays. And then if lads sort of forgot a girlfriend's birthday, they'd be like, "Oh, Murph, could you help me out with a cake?" So I'd have done that, and we had a coffee morning for Galway Hospice, and I made a few bits, and lads were like, "Oh, who made that?" And I was like, "Oh, it was me." And not in so many words, they said that it wasn't you, you know, a few choice words, and it sort of came from there, where I made things on our tough training days for the coffee room, and they flicked me a few euro on Revolut, and they always said when you finish up you should definitely go for it. And I started a little wholesale bakery in Galway for about a year and a half, and it sort of all stemmed from there.
Yeah, and it's great that you had that to fall back on, Jim. You would know not a lot of rugby players don't have a career to fall back on. Many of them do, but what do people do whenever, you know, they leave the game?
Those players who are destined and do have long playing careers have been encouraged to look elsewhere. So many of them do degrees. Ian Henderson's got a degree in mathematics. Darren Cave who had a bakery as well, did a master's degree. So an awful lot of them are preparing for retirement, voluntary or otherwise, and I think they do get good advice. It's very easy for them, and Jonny would know this, to think I'm going to be a professional rugby player forever. If I get 10 years out of it, I'll make a decent bit of money, put it in the bank, and start something. But you've really got to think of the possibility of it not happening. And rugby years ago used to be referred to as a contact sport. It's now a collision sport, and it does concern me that there are more and more players are getting walloped. Now the protocols involving concussion are now much more stringent, and players, if they do get a bang, they're not allowed to play until they're 100% again. Boxing used to be an amateur boxing. If the referee stopped a contest because of an injury to the head, you weren't allowed to play for 28 days, and that was completely mad. There was no choice about that. So I think rugby is being played by bigger, stronger, faster, heavier, meaner guys.
Units, as you call it.
Oh, units, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I think the medical protocols that are being observed are much more stringent and much more beneficial. They're never going to take it away, because you never know what might happen to you. Yeah. But at least in Jonny's case, he's got more than something to fall back on. Absolutely,
and a huge success so far. So let's talk about Nanny and Grandad, who feature very heavily in your social media. You cook in their house, right?
Yeah, I do a wee bit at home as well, but it's just nice. They live, a couple of minute walk up the road, so every morning I'd be out for a walk. Well, I wasn't out this morning with them, my granda. We'd take the dog for a walk and coffee, and my nanny would be like, she'd be like, what do we want to make today? Do this, do that. So it's lovely, and not even the bacon, it's the crack as well,
And they're not afraid to give you an opinion, if they like or if they don't like what you've made.
Yeah, I wish I had the sort of cameras here, that could be on full time, because I miss half the stuff, and it's some people might see it as abuse or tough love, but that's just every household here in the country, that's
just Northern Ireland.
Yeah, exactly, and it's just, I wouldn't have it any other way, and they've kept me right my whole life, and
keeps you humble.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you've brought some goodies in for us. What have you brought here?
There's some just traditional mince pies and some cranberry and orange shortbread there.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Ooh,
amazing. We'll have those with coffee afterwards, Jim.
Certainly, I might even have them now. No, better not.
Well, yeah, they're there.
No, thank you very much.
You have a book coming out. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of people who were saying, you should do an e-book or a book, and I was like, I don't know. And it was more doing it with my granny to have the recipes there, for the future, and I had quite a few done, and there's loads of brands and agents reaching out because the page got so many followers, and Paddy McAllister, one of my good mates, helped me get sign with an agency, and my agent Lynn Hunter was like, you should be doing a hardback book. And I was like, who on earth's going to want a hardback book off me? And lo and behold, 2 weeks later we were in London for a meeting with Penguin House and Avery Press, and it's sort of, like you said earlier, it's history now, and it's out next March, which is a bit mad, and I brought it along there. There's just, there's a holding cover at the moment, but yeah, it's going to be called Bakes and Wee Treats. So.
That's lovely. And a holding cover, as you say, because your granny wasn't very happy about being on the front of that, was she?
No, so there's been a lot of back and forth with her. I'd love to have her in the front, but she's adamant she's not going to be on it. So we'll see. Maybe if there's a book too, I can maybe twist her arm.
Maybe so. And a lot of them are her recipes, yeah?
Yeah, no, any of the recipes that are going into it are all ones we would use, and just especially those traditional ones your soda farls, potato farls, all that, wheaten bread.
Yum.
So all the good stuff, I think it's sort of lost in a way, because you could go into some bakeries or shops and you mightn't get the same stuff as you would have back then, or even apple potato bread. You wouldn't see it in places now, only a select few. So just those good, wholesome traditional bakes.
Yeah, keeping that whole tradition alive of good Northern Ireland food.
Yeah.
Tell me, you may be out of rugby as a professional player, but you still follow the game?
Oh yeah, I'd watch a good few games with my granda, he loves it, so I've been able to bring him to a few, to the internationals and stuff, and he's in his absolute element. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Now, we've talked earlier, Jim's going to be hanging up the headphones, we think. What advice would you give to Jim for, transitioning to moving on to a whole new thing, a whole new life?
Get yourself an apron and into the kitchen.
Well,
baking.
I do cook. I do like to cook. And you mentioned Granny. My grandmother, I was born on a farm down in Ballymena, and my grandmother made her own potato bread, or fudge as used to call it in Ballymena, and soda bread, and she had a big black griddle, and she beat all these things up, and she shaped them, and she used to churn her own butter and everything else, and she could make the best champ in the Northern Hemisphere, or indeed probably the universe. You know, she had an old farmhouse range on it and a big black pot, and she boiled the potatoes and had another wee pot with milk and scallions chopped up, and whatever way she mixed it, and the right amount of butter and everything else, and she used to serve it up, and you'd put a bit of a hole in it, and
make a little well in the middle,
and put the lump of butter, and then cover it all over. I can still taste it now.
Yeah, my granddad would talk about his granny making soda fars and like the butter like dripping down your hand there enough, like just fresh off the griddle. So
this is bakes and wee treats. Have you any more planned? You'll do the recipe for the traditional champ or something like that?
For now it's just that, and just sort of see what happens thereafter. So just enjoying it, and it's been so fun being able to like bring everyone else along, like my family and my grandparents and friends and stuff as well. So that's probably the best part of it, just making those sort of memories with them.
We wish you all the best with the book, Jonny.
Thank
It's
you.
out in March?
Yeah, March next year, March 13th.
March 2025. Lovely to talk to you both. Thank you, Jonny Murphy, Jim Neely. Thank you both for joining me today. And thank you for watching. Until next time, bye-bye.